Hello everybody, Maven here, and at the launch of Ashen Iron, Threadlings received a massive buff. As a sandbox change, they just received a flat 20% damage buff, and on top of that, we also got a brand new artifact mod called Pack Tactics, which increases them by another 30% and allows them to stun unstoppable champions. So Threadlings are hitting very hard right now. And then also, Strand Warlock got a lot of sandbox changes at the launch of Ashen Iron. It got massive buffs, so I set off to create the ultimate Threadling build. Now, I cannot even begin to emphasize the amount of work I put in to create today's build. Yesterday, I was up testing Strand Warlock builds from when I woke up to when I went to bed. I was up like 15 hours testing every possible option you could run on Strand Warlock until I ultimately settled on one of the most piece of trash Strand Warlock exotics there are, the Swarmers. In my opinion, the Swarmers were always one of the worst and most overhyped Strand Warlock exotics. There are a lot of better options, trust me. But with these new Strand Warlock overhauls, the Swarmers just jumped up a lot in value, way more than they were before. So without further ado, let's break it down. Hope you enjoy. Shout out to our sponsor, Advanced GG, the #1 gaming supplement in the world. Use code MAVEN at checkout for 10% off. Link down below. Thank you. Okay, so I just want to say again, I tested everything. If you ask in the comments, but what about this? But what about that? Yes, I tried it. Everything has its flaws. Are there other configurations with higher upsides? Sure, but my goal was to create a build with the least amount of flaws and the most consistency. I went into this at the start of the day fully convinced that I would make a build based around the Euphony with Verity's Brow, because that is the build that creates the most amount of Threadlings in the game, but it also felt a little sluggish and harder to survive with. There are two buffs in particular that led me to today's build. First of all, Weaver's Call got a brand new buff, and I wanted that to be the main focus of the build because it naturally generates a lot of Threadlings. You create 3 Threadlings upon casting a Rift, and dealing any damage may periodically create a perched Threadling. Additionally, while you have this aspect equipped, dealing damage with a Threadling will now grant Rift energy. So it's a really quick way to spam a bunch of rifts, and that was originally going to be the core part of my survival since Strand Warlock doesn't have things like Restoration or Devour. But then we come to another buffed aspect that also helps out with survival, and that's Weavewalk. You can activate it midair to become ethereal, which will drain your melee charges over time. During this time, you generate perched Threadlings, and with this brand new buff, when you exit Weavewalk, you now gain Woven Mail based on how long you were in Weavewalk. I don't know the exact timing, but I believe it's about 2 seconds of Woven Mail per 1 second in Weavewalk. So if I was in Weavewalk for, say, 5 seconds, I'll have 10 seconds of Woven Mail when I exit it. I believe that's in the ballpark of the correct measurement, but don't quote me on that. And that's great for survival because not only does being in Weavewalk make you essentially invisible and have insane resist, but when you exit it and have that Woven Mail, that's a 45% resist for give or take like 10 seconds, depending. And then that's going to put our Shield Crush artifact mod online that says that while Woven Mail is active, you gain 25% increased melee regenerate. So having that on top of 100 melee stat will allow us to have a decent uptime of Weavewalk. Now, for those who didn't know, there is a trick you can do with Weavewalk to make a boatload of Threadlings and have great synergy with Weaver's Call. So dealing damage with a weapon deploys a perched Threadling, right? So if you hit an enemy with a damage over time weapon, such as an area denial grenade launcher, for example, and then you enter Weavewalk, those periodic Threadlings you create will deploy automatically at the target in a steady rhythm as that damage over time weapon ticks away at them. So it's safe to say that you really want to use an area denial frame grenade launcher with this build just for that synergy because it's so powerful. And as much as the Festival Flight with Slice and Attrition Orbs has perfect synergy with this build, as well as a new Threadling Proliferation artifact mod to generate Threadlings of its own, it just didn't feel right having to manually reload it. It ruined the flow of the build and made it feel sluggish. I needed something that auto-loaded, so my only option was the Lost Signal, which is the only auto-loading area denial frame. And that felt so much better. And straight away, the Verity's Brow, the Necrotic Grips, and the Sanguine Alchemy were off the table given this build setup. Eye of Another World wasn't fast enough, and the Matayo Doksha was honestly the only other promising option. I was actually very impressed with it, and I plan on experimenting with it more in the future. But it felt like from a neutral standpoint, the Swarmers gave me the most benefits. Since I wasn't applying Unravel with my needles and I wasn't using Grapple or Final Warning, the Swarmers gave me an outlet to cause Unravel, and Unravel is great. It creates those Seekers that fly all over the place and damage enemies, which contributes to Thread of Generation to help me get back my nades. Plus, destroying a Tangle spawns 2 Threadlings, which is a little icing on the cake. It alone is a pretty bottom shelf exotic, but given our very specific circumstances today, it fit the bill. Then after I had the basis of my build settled, I was thinking about potential loadouts because survival was my #1 priority with this build, but I also didn't want to give up too much in terms of ability spam. Because the thing about ability spam is that I really wanted to run the Empowering Rift because it also just got a gigantic buff. So now when you're standing in an Empowering Rift, you gain increased ability regenerate, and this helped out a lot. I'll show you a couple comparisons against Carl with Healing Rift first, and then Empowering Rift after, so you can gauge how much we can spam our abilities. So the loop is that we use our Threadling nade and our Rift to immediately send out 11 Threadlings, and then all those Threadling hits grant me a ton of Rift energy so I can throw out another one, and then at that point I toss out a GL shot and enter Weavewalk to do that combo that I showed you earlier, and all these Threadlings that we're birthing out of our crotch are consistently granting Rift energy and also grenade energy from Thread of Generation, so as soon as I have one of those abilities back, we exit Weavewalk and use one, which will top off the other, and then we just repeat the process. And the ability spam is so great that it's almost infinite, but not quite, but it's enough to be satisfied, I guess. And the only way it would be infinite is if you use something like the Monte Carlo, which would grant you all the ability energy you need to be able to spam that Weavewalk combo endlessly, and therefore spam infinite rifts and Threadling nades. But the problem is that the Monte Carlo isn't an amazing weapon on its own, and it also means that you can't run an auto-loading area denial GL. Anyway, let's take a look at the same rotation but with an Empowering Rift for the boosted regen. And the ability spam is noticeably better. And when you enter Weavewalk, it's essentially just like Void Hunter invisibility. And since you're massively tanky, you can just chill inside your Empowering Rift and reap all those benefits while you're essentially immortal. And this just felt so much better to me, but obviously when you do tougher content with an Empowering Rift, it's just going to be a lot harder to survive. That was my problem. And I couldn't use the Buried Bloodline to get Devour because that would mean I'd be rocking double specials. And I don't have a high enough weapon stat to justify running double specials along with a machine gun, although that could work in activities with lots of ammo boxes. And originally I was using the 3rd iteration because that allowed me to go invisible, but it felt pretty brutal in the moments I was not invisible. So ultimately I ended up with the Red Death. Final blows of this thing grant you and your allies Cure ×2, and also grants you Restoration ×2, the strongest form of restoration in the game. So this thing is awesome for survival, but my only issue is that it was pretty weak. But it does get powered up by 25% by the Empowering Rift. So it may not be guaranteed survival, but it does help out and kind of allows us to run Empowering Rift without too much of a downside and have our improved ability spam. Plus, if we utilize the Red Death with this build, that means we can use the Fever and Chill artifact mod to become Radiant on solar weapon crits, which will then activate the other half of our Shield Crush artifact mod because we're going to become Radiant, so that's going to be plus 25% to our grenade damage and regenerate. So there's another benefit of the Red Death there. So I honestly feel that there are 3 viable loadouts for this build. Lost Signal with Red Death, which is what I'm running, that allows you to run Empowering Rift. Then there's the Unloved, or whatever strand primary of your choice, along with the Buried Bloodline, which also allows you to run Empowering Rift and Threadling Proliferation, but it does not allow the GL Weavewalk combo. And finally, there's the Monte Carlo with the Versus Velocity Baton or the Psycho Pump, which allows you guaranteed infinite abilities, but you would most likely have to run Healing Rift, and your gameplay loop would be slower without auto-loading. So those are the 3 loadout suggestions. They all have their benefits, and they all have their flaws. And I just basically had to choose which one would be the most consistent in my eyes, and I ended up on Lost Signal with Red Death. But I would not argue with you if you chose any of the other loadouts. They're all equally as viable. So the build has now been explained, so it's time to break down the specifics. So for our subclass here, already one of our aspects, Weaver's Call and Weavewalk, and Thread of Generation for grenade energy, Thread of Evolution to buff our Threadlings by another 33%, Thread of Fury to get back melee energy when we throw a tangle at stuff, Thread of Isolation to cause Sever whenever we hit consistent crits, and then Thread of Mind to get some Rift energy back when we defeat a suspended target. Now you might be wondering, how are we going to suspend targets? There's nothing in our subclass here that suspend targets. Well, we have an artifact mod called Tangled Web, so whenever you do any action that would create a tangle, it also suspends nearby combatants. And your Swarmers is going to help out a lot with that, since your Threadlings now unravel, and killing something unraveled spawns a tangle, which will then suspend stuff. Kill the suspended stuff, you get Rift energy, you get it. So Thread of Mind is decent. It's not required though. You can run Ascent if you'd like. It's up to you. Now onto the mod setup here, and there's a lot of loose mods that are up for creative interpretation if you want to swap things around. You know, for example, like double solar ammo gen on the chest to boost your red death's ammo gen up to 98, so it makes more special for your lost signal and stuff like that, and like double special finders on the helmet. And typically for 90% of builds, your glove mods are like the most important part of your build for things like orb gen, but in this build your glove mods really do not matter. Like, you can run whatever the heck you want on your gloves. I just got firepower so my threadling nades can make an orb, but your other threadling sources do not make orbs, so it's just your threadling nade. And then I got like a solar loader and like fastball because I had extra space for it. But your other mods don't proc. Like, you can't proc bolstering detonation or impact induction or anything like that, so it doesn't really matter what you run on your gloves. The main point of these mods is just to make orbs with Siphon, Firepower, and Reaper so that you can proc utility kickstart on your class item, because our Rift is arguably like the most important part of our build and we want to have that up as much as possible. So for that reason, we got stacks on stacks and charged up and powerful attraction to help with gathering all the armor charge. And when we grab these orbs, they also proc innervation and insulation on our boots for more grenade and Rift energy. And that does it for our mods. And onto our stats with the build, I would recommend going triple hundreds in class, melee, and grenade, because this is through and through an ability spam build. You want to chain all these abilities back to back with each other so they're all equally as important. And this right here is the main reason why I didn't go with the Verity's Brow Euphony build, because with that build you would need to hit like 200 ammo stat, and then all of your abilities would heavily suffer, which is kind of like, you know, the abilities are the point of this build, so it just didn't feel like it fit too well, as much as it seems good on the surface. And that about does it for the build. Now for the gameplay loop, I would say it's not a very beginner-friendly build. It takes a lot of practice and knowledge on how to sequence things. I would say rule of thumb is to just use your Threadling Grenade and your Rift whenever they are available. Do not sit on them, do not sleep on them, just use them as soon as the charges are up, because, you know, your goal of this build is kind of to recharge them. So if they're up, they're kind of just doing nothing. So yeah, use them immediately, and then throw an Aerids and LGL shot out, pop Weavewalk, deploy those Threadlings while you are in Weavewalk, just like I showed you the combo earlier. That should get you back either your Rift or your Threadling Grenade, and those will chain into each other back to back, and you just repeat the process. If you can find an opportunity to throw a tangle at something to proc Thread of Fury, do so, because that helps a lot with the melee regen. And that about does it for the build. So there you have it, the quote-unquote ultimate Strand Warlock build. If you want to play Strand Warlock, this is something you should do. Is this the end-all, be-all Strand Warlock build though? No, there's definitely plenty of options, like the classic Verity's Brow grapple spam build, which hits incredibly hard with, you know, a 1-2 punch grapple at death roast ×5. It's awesome. There's also the necrotic grips build, which spreads poison all over the place. It's incredible for ad clear. There's different Strand Warlock builds for different situations, and this is kind of just like a generalized build meant to take advantage of these new buffs to things like Weaver's Call and Weavewalk. So if you wanted to give it a try, as always, a dim loadout link will be down below in the description and also the pinned comment. And if you got any buddies who are Warlock mains who might want to try this out as well, I'd appreciate if you consider sharing this with them. Thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit the like button and drop a comment, as it helps out a ton. And if you are new here, please consider subscribing. Would love to have you here for more Ashen Iron content on the way. And I will catch you in the next video. Hope you have a nice day.